Hey everyone, welcome to our virtual summit. I'm John Bacher,
And I'm JC.
and we'll be covering the critical moves for FFLs to successfully optimize firing range and retail operations through uncertain times. Our agenda today is packed with great content and great speakers. We're going to start off right now with JC and I talking about being prepared. At 10 a.m., we'll have our keynote speakers from the ATF, Tom Chinham and Alfonso Hughes. And at 11 o'clock, we'll have James Barthel joining us, CEO of MT2. And at noon, join us for a lively discussion with Jeff Hewitt from Locked In Affinity Insurance. At 1 p.m., we'll be joined by Wendy Christie, who's going to talk about everything you need to know regarding hiring and firing during these uncertain times. At 2 p.m., Rob Anderson from MT2 is going to join us and talk to us about firing range lead mitigation. And at 3 o'clock, we have our Don't Miss session with two of our partner attorneys, Joe Cavan and Mike Brown from Kutak Rock, and we're going to be talking all about your questions sent in regarding the current and future landscape regarding a political scenario with the Biden administration and how it affects our firearm laws going forward. And remember to join us again at 4 p.m. where we bring back all of our speakers to answer more of your questions and have open dialogue.
Well, we certainly have a tremendous lineup today. For those of you that don't know, so we know we have a number of our clients on the call today. We are FFL consultants. We support FFLs nationwide. We support retailers, ranges, pawn shops, as well as manufacturers out there. So we offer a myriad of services. We're also NSSF consultant team members. What that means is essentially we support the NSSF's more than 10,000 members.
So JC and I are going to take you through a lot of topics today. Number one on everyone's mind is what is the future if and when we have a Biden administration? We're going to walk you through ATF inspections, everything we see, everything we know. Make sure you are successful when you have your next ATF visit. We're going to walk through the new 4473, giving you the highlights. We're going to talk about ammo and firearms availability. A lot of questions, again, have come in with the registration process. You're all asking about what's down the road for firearm supply chain. We're going to spend some time on range issues and things we're seeing, best practices right now because of the ammunition supplies issue and our new members and new gun owners. A lot of Q&A came in on this one, so we're going to try to answer all your questions. What's the future for civil unrest? This not only do we have an administration issue, we've got unemployment, we have a pandemic. There's a lot of looting still expected. So we're going to be talking about how to prepare for what we've seen and what we know. We're going to give you some best practices for risk management just over the next 4, 5, 6 months. And obviously a lot of questions are asking what's ahead? What do we know? What can we share? We're seeing a lot of issues and concern regarding the Biden administration. And now, although we have insights and partners within the political community, we have insights from the National Shooting Sports Foundation. Right now, we're all in the same place. We just don't know. Of course, we're hoping for many positives, but we just don't know which way this election will fall out. The first thing everyone's asking about is assault weapons. Will there be a ban? We know there was a ban in the last administration. So if the Biden-Harris ticket evolves here, and they are the new administrators and the new president, we probably can expect something, but again, we just don't know. High-capacity magazines, definitely on the Harris agenda. So we know that will be an issue on the table. Firearms surrender and enforcement is being asked about all the time. What happens if there's a ban? Who will be used to enforce the ban, collect firearms? And that type of issue keeps coming up, but we just don't know yet. Maybe some of these questions we will present to the ATF in our next session and get some answers. Private party sales are being adopted by states across the country. Now, this could sound like a negative, but the real positive is that it brings more business into every gun dealer who can do a private party transfer. We have red flag laws being adopted by communities across the country. There's laws being implemented everywhere that penalize lawful gun owners when their firearms are lost or stolen and they have to report it to the local jurisdiction. That's just not fair. So maybe we can get some insight again in our next session. Will there be restrictions or background checks required for ammunition purchases? NFA weapons and reclassification. We've seen the recent issue with the honey badger. Will there be additional, they were given a 60-day stay, but will there be some fallout on this for all types of AR pistols and other NFA type weaponry following, the election decision? We just don't know yet. And ATF inspections, are they on the rise? Will they continue to be postponed? Well, what we do know, we'll talk about in just a few minutes, is We have been seeing an increase in inspections relatively recently. We don't think the ATF is waiting until the pandemic subsides. We can only expect the increase to continue, and we think that will continue into the new administration.
Yeah, JP, great points. And I think the key phrase there is we don't know. But I think even more importantly, not just that we don't know and the entire industry doesn't know, but the ATF doesn't know. And let's just face facts. I mean, until the new administration takes over and we either see it legislatively or through executive order, that's what we're going to have to pay attention to. But so let's talk about ATF inspection activities and what's on the table. So first of all, it's important to note that inspections are starting to occur again. It really comes down to what state you're in and just the conditions in that state. So you really have to pay attention to that to see if they're willing to make their way out again. A number of field divisions are still operating from home, the IOIs and such. So, and they are playing catch up. They have a number of things to catch up on. First of all, they had an entire plate of inspections that were scheduled previously. And in addition to that, they have a requirement to get out to all the new licensees. So anybody that's recently applied for a license and was approved for a license during the pandemic, you can expect a site visit, that initial interview and inspection. So results are pretty much 50-50. We've had about 30 or so clients that have received audits so far around the country. Warning conferences. Warning conferences are still occurring. During the pandemic phase, the majority of warning conferences were occurring over the phone, virtually, or through a Skype or a Teams or a Zoom. So those are occurring. Currently, got about 17 or so action plans ongoing. Those are corrective action plans where the FFLs have come to us and asked us to support them through the warning conference and set a plan in place to really get them back on the straight and narrow and get things moving in the proper direction. Really helps with the ATF. The ATF really appreciates that. We have a good relationship with the ATF, so we like to make sure that the FFLs that we support are doing things the right way and ensuring that the next time they get inspected, they're going to be good to go. So again, state dependent. So pay attention to what's going on in your state as far as how open you are. Florida, for instance, I know Florida, they are making their way out and about again. That's because Florida is pretty much open for the most part. So do expect inspections and re-inspections, inspections for your new FFLs, re-inspections for anybody on a warning conference, warning letter, and then obviously just the straightforward random inspection for those FFLs that haven't received an inspection in quite some time.
But we know there's ongoing inspections right now in Texas, Florida, Georgia, Michigan, and I heard Montana and Colorado. So I've got 7, Jason. You hear any other states?
I have heard pretty much the same as you. The Southeast is pretty big right now.
Yeah. So if you haven't had an inspection, get involved with your network, whether it be a chat group or, like I said, we try to post this on our newsletters, just so you know what you get prepared. Always stay compliant, ready, but they're out there and the inspections are ongoing.
So let's talk about the inspection for a second here. Or what, other than obviously your warning conferences, things like that, but what causes an inspection? And obviously you have that random inspection that occurs. Basically, you haven't been inspected in a while. But more importantly, if you're an FFL or a range FFL, and you see a lot of denials, a lot of individuals coming in who have been denied for a transaction to purchase a firearm, that could be an indication that you're being targeted to be somebody's targeting you to attempt to buy a firearm. One thing, we've heard it a few times now, that we need to really be careful of when it comes to those individuals that are targeting you to attempt to purchase a firearm. Don't let them walk in and say, hey, I just want to see if I can pass a background check. That's a huge red flag, and that's a big no-no. There needs to be a genuine intent to purchase a firearm. So the other one is trace requests. If you're receiving an inordinate amount of trace requests, it's important to pay attention to that and see what's going on. And then just your overall quantity of NICS or point of contact state background checks. If you're processing a lot of guns, you may show up as a potential, hey, we want to take a look at that FFL and see what's going on there. Then obviously back to the re-inspections and the randoms. And I would tell you the randoms are a lot fewer than the rest. Obviously, if you're an FFL that's got a lot of denials and a lot of trace requests, there's obviously going to throw up a flag there to say, hey, what's going on here? let's make sure everything's on the up and up. The things that you need to pay attention to every day: 4473s, your transfers, that's private party transfers, your FFL to FFL transfers, etc. Your A&D logbooks. We have training guides for all of this, and we're going to make those available to you. So SOPs for critical processes. If you're a one-man shop or a husband and wife team, may not necessarily be needed, but if you're operating a store that has any number of employees, you really need to make sure that you have your processes, procedures, and practices documented so they have a point of reference to go back to. That's vitally important. We're finding that the ATF is liking that more and more, that FFLs actually have documented procedures outlining what their employee base is supposed to be doing, and that their staff knows that, hey, there's a book here to help, walk through the process so nothing's missed. And we're going to talk about double and triple check. If you're, again, that one-man shop or husband and wife team, maybe a double check's all you need. But we highly recommend double checks at a minimum. Triple check, if you're processing a lot of firearms, you may want to have that third set of eyes on it at the end of the business day, just to make sure everything's good to go before you file that 4473. Warnings and revocations, we help a lot with warnings and revocations. That warning conference or warning letter, that is your first indication that, hey, you really have, you're on your last step. You've got one more chance, and you need to take that seriously. And that's where those corrective action plans come in. And revocations, that's the serious. You're going to lose your license. And that's where we and our partner law firms come in, and we take a look at what's going on, and we determine, and we'll talk about willful negligence and all that here in a moment. But that's when we come in and take a look at what's going on and work with the ATF, work with you to figure out if there's some remedy to this situation that works. The important thing here is, at any point throughout your business operations, if you have a head scratcher, if you're sitting back thinking to yourself, I don't know if that's right, I don't know if I have the right processes in place, pick up the phone and call us. Just schedule a call with us. We're happy to talk to you.
Yeah, JC, I want to just go back to that warning and revocation piece. I think you get into that a little later, but isn't it true, of what we've seen is that once you get that first warning letter, you're on a list.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
the ATF is not going to forget about you for quite a while.
Yeah.
You talk about re-inspections and revisits. That's one of those triggers that keeps you on that list, that if you got a bad visit this year, you're most likely going to have a visit next year. Am I right there?
Oh, absolutely. I would tell you between 12 and 24 months, it's a certainty. All right. So next up, we're going to talk about inspection prep. So, it's really important just to keep this in the back of your mind, that there's the potential that every 12 months, the ATF can come in and inspect you. That's by law. They're authorized to. And, the frequency of that happening, not so much. But you know what? If you have had an inspection and had a pretty lengthy report of violations, or you've gotten a warning letter or a warning conference, that applies more to you than anyone. So what you want to do is make sure that you're continuously monitoring all of your business activities, paperwork, your A&D records, etc. So one of the things that I'll tell you as far as preparation, expect that the ATF is going to do that 1 year look back. They're going to go back to the trailing 12 months, review your 4473s, review your denials, review your 3310s, review your NTN reports, and they're going to bring an NTN report with them. And they're going to verify that every NTN number that you were issued for the sale of a firearm or for a denial, that there's an ATF form 4473 present for that transaction. So keep that in mind. They're going to do an all firearm inventory, and they're going to verify gun to book, book to gun, and they're going to do a complete and thorough A&D review. And this could include several IOIs in your premise for a week, maybe even 2 weeks, depending on what your firearm inventory looks like. Finally, they're going to go through all your ATF Form 4473s for at least the last 12 months. So be aware of that paperwork is vitally important to your business, and it's vitally important to successfully passing an ATF inspection. Next, they're going to do those employee interviews. They're going to do observations. We do all of these things on our mock inspections. And I will tell you right now, we do a lot of corrective action right on the spot with FFL employees. And the ATF is going to be monitoring to see how transactions are processed, see how you're qualifying customers, things like that. And lastly, when the inspection is done, they're going to do that closing conference and they're going to walk you through all of their findings. Now, they're going to give you an opportunity to ask questions and give responses and even dispute things. We want you, and I know that I believe we're going to talk about this in a minute, but we want you to be cordial with the ATF. They're not your enemy. They have a job to do. It goes a lot easier if you're not adversarial. Be cordial. They have a job to do. They're just doing their job.
JC, I sat in on a couple of the closing conferences recently with our clients, and depending on where you are, and depending how, again, cordial, inviting, open, somewhat conversational, depending on how that visit goes, those closing conferences, most of them, for the most part, have gone pretty smooth. Listen to everything JC is saying. But I think it's also the approach of whether or not this is a random audit. We haven't seen you in 5 years or 3 years, or if this is a visit resulting from a bad visit last year. And I got to say, there's certainly indications which way, whether it goes one way or another. But if you get the same inspector that was there last year on your inspection that didn't go so well, and the same person shows up, you can almost assume it's going to be somewhat of a little bit of stress going through another review with them, especially if you haven't corrected all of the items they specifically documented in that last report of violation. So we can't reiterate enough how important it is to be cordial, inviting, collaborative during that inspection. And JC, I know you mentioned once per year, but it goes back to your prior conversation of you can have a visit for a variety of reasons. It sounded like that random visit was last on the list. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to reiterate, if you had a report of violations, it doesn't matter if it resulted in a warning letter or a warning conference, if it went to that level. But what I will reiterate is it's really important to have that corrective action plan, to take that report of violations and actually sit down with each violation and map out corrective action for each violation. I will tell you, the vast majority of FFLs that we support, and we support a lot of them, they find that to be very, very helpful for them and their staff. So they know, because that IOI is going to come back in and they're going to bring that report of violations that you had, and they're going to make sure every one of those things are corrected. So it's vitally important to take that seriously.
And what we help gun dealers with, FFLs, is once we create that corrective action plan, not only does it get submitted to the ATF, but they review it. And the biggest challenge is you as a gun dealer implementing it. And that's where we, in our follow-up and our monthly calls with our clients, it's important that we go through that action plan with you and make sure you're doing what you said you were going to do, to JC's point. That will be a document they'll walk in and refer to a year from now or the next year following and say, you said you were going to do this, but we don't see it being done. Hence moving to the next step. So let's go through the top violations from our visits, our team visits. We have a lot of folks out there running around doing audits now, and we want to keep this relative. This list may not line up specifically with what the ATF is publishing, but here's what we want to reiterate with you right now to get ready for your next inspection. And you sold a lot. The reason we're spending a lot of time on this now is you sold a lot of guns in the last 6 months. I think, what's the number, JC? 18 million now?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think it's probably 12, 12 million.
But
the last.
By the time this is over, there's going to be a lot of transfers out there for the ATF to go out and verify, inspect, and make sure transfers are done correctly. So we want to start out with saying, and this is what we tell everyone, every box counts. It's not a matter of how many 4473s I had incorrect. The report of violations is going to list each and every box or line on your form that was incorrectly completed or missing information, et cetera. So every box counts, and that's good training for your employees. Next is legibility. If the ATF inspector cannot read or decipher a number on a serial number, that's going to be a problem. So we urge you to make sure your staff is using good penmanship, printing correctly, taking their time, and make it readable. Remember, these forms are going to last a lifetime of the firearm, at least 20 years for tracing purposes. And that's the big concern with legibility. These forms have to be able to be read 10, 12 years down the road during, if in fact that firearm ever shows up in a criminal situation or has to have a trace done. Next, we find invalid and expired ID being used all the time. And one thing right now is the expired IDs being authorized or permitted to be used because of the pandemic. We urge you that if you're accepting invalid or actually expired IDs, that they are actually noted as such in box 31 or box 32 in the new 4473. Note that it was an authorized expired ID due to pandemic. Remember, these inspectors might come in a year or two or three from now and look back at your forms and see this, seeing expired IDs, driver's licenses being used. On the next forms, we have a tremendous amount of errors. This is probably, for me, one of the biggest issues I see errors in when I'm conducting audits on site, is firearms actually being sold to folks who were denied. That actually does happen, believe it or not. It may not be happening in your firearms dealership, but it actually does happen. And that's a big, big, big red flag. Something the ATF actually has to go and react to and retrieve those firearms. And we see Brady dates expiring all the time or not being documented at all, or firearms being transferred before the Brady date expiration. Another big problem, that whole box 27 information is critical to validating and authorizing the transfer of the firearm. So a lot of folks, a lot of eyes are on this section, and very important for you to be incorporating or including updated dates. If you were releasing a firearm on a date prior to a Brady date because you received a proceed, box 27, make sure all of that information is included. It used to be box 19 on the old form. This is probably the most common phone call we get weekly, JC, I think you'll agree, is I have an out-of-state purchaser looking to purchase a long gun. Am I okay to do so? And I know it's hard for everyone to know all of the laws in all of the states, but we do this all the time. So we have either have our list handy, or we go ahead and just know the information, or have to do a little research in places like California and Washington State or New York. But most out-of-state transfers, or all out-of-state transfers, require that you follow the in-state law for your firearm sale, as well as the out-of-state law for the person if they are from out of state. So again, you must comply with both. Illinois has a lot of restrictions, Florida has restrictions, and more states are implementing state requirements for firearms transfers. So the ATF, even though they're federal, will be validating you following both state laws. Missing signatures goes without saying. We can't be missing a signature by a transferee, and we can't be missing a signature by an employee. And missing signatures literally invalidate that firearms transfer and will be a major citable violation on your report if and when you have an inspection. This is hard to talk about because it happens more and more, and it's a hard program to manage. But if you're not submitting your 3310s.4s for handguns and 3310.12s for multiple long gun purchases on the southern border states, these are major violations, and they're critical to the functions of the ATF. That's why these forms are so important, and so important to be sent in on the day that multiple firearms are purchased. These forms are critical for the criminal division of the ATF to be tracking gun trafficking on a daily basis, possible straw purchasing occurring in a certain region. So these are critical to be submitted, and they can't be missing from the 4473s during the inspection. You should not keep them in a separate file. We urge you to keep them attached to 4473s involved in the transfers. One error equals multiple reported violations. And what we mean by that is if you miss a signature in a box, or a date is incorrect, or a NICS wasn't updated, not only can you have a violation cited by the inspector for that block or that line that it relates to, but that violation will show up in other sections of the report, meaning the transfer, there's a statute that says invalid or illegal transfer of a firearm. Well, if you're missing a signature from a transferee, that shows up in the citation area on the report for missing signatures, but then that same violation will show up elsewhere later in the report for processing an invalid or an illegal firearms transfer. So sometimes we see report of violations that are 8 or 9 pages, and sometimes we see reports of violations that are 20 or 25 pages long. And we find when we audit and we look back at all the violations and try to figure out the action planning, that it's the same violation showing up in many places. So just so you know, if you've never had a report of violations, it's an interesting document to review. And then missing firearms. If there's one issue that really sets off the fireworks during an inspection, is if the ATF team finds that you are missing firearms from your book inventory, firearms that are supposed to be in stock that simply aren't. And we know this happens for so many different reasons, but it all comes back to daily disciplines, training, and responsibilities from your folks who are completing transfers and updating your A&D book, your bound book. Missing a firearm sets off the fireworks, as we say. Not only do you have to get it reported, but this is a critical violation result that'll show up in your report, and certainly lead to the other steps JC talked about, warnings and revocations.
Yeah, just a few things to kind of reiterate on what JB just covered. Every box counts, and that's really important to just hammer that into your own brain as well as your staff's brain to make sure they're checking every box, right? The missing signatures, not only is important as far as just the initial certification, but I find it a lot on research. Individuals aren't, or transferees, the licensee, the gun store isn't having the individual recertify. That's really, really important that they do recertify. If they've left the store and are waiting for that background check to be completed, when they come back in, you need to make sure that they recertify and date that box. So the missing 3310.4s, not only missing, but delayed. They have to be completed at the end of the business day. So that same day that firearm gets transferred, or those firearms in this case get transferred, you have to submit your 3310.4 and 3310.12 where appropriate. So really important, catch it all the time during our mock inspections where they either haven't submitted or they were delayed, whether it be a day, oh, my person does it at the end of the week, whatever the case may be, has to be the same day. On missing firearms, it's one thing, it's a good thing that you caught a missing firearm. It's a bad thing that the ATF catches a missing firearm. That's why firearms inventories and firearms counts are so important. Depending on the size of your shop, we make the recommendation for larger shops to do it on at least a quarterly basis. Reach out to us and we'll give you some kind of insights into some of the things that we recommend to mid and large shops, mid-size and larger shops. We kind of have a good methodology, a good rhythm for FFLs to follow for firearms inventories and firearms counts. It really helps kind of alleviate some of the manpower constraints that come along with that. So reach out to us, we'll give you some insights. All right, the new Form 4473. We've all seen it. You better have implemented it on November 1st. That was the date. The major changes is obviously the format, the 5 sections. The firearms section has moved to the very top of the form. And I know there's been a lot of concerns and talk about firearms registration, and that's why they did it. Actually, if you would have read the old Form 4473, the certification and the question 11A, the firearms listed on this form in old section A, the individual, the buyer, the transferee was actually certifying that the firearms listed on the form they were actually purchasing for themselves. Well, if you weren't filling that form out until they finished section A, they were actually certifying that they weren't buying any firearms. So all they did was move those firearms to the top of the form. What does this help you do? This helps you ensure that the customer has a genuine interest in a firearm. I said it earlier, somebody's walking into your store and just simply saying, hey, listen, I want to see if I can pass a background check. Well, guess what? No, absolutely not. There has to be a firearm on that form before you start that process. So why firearms description first? That's what it is, okay? 0, Number of firearms transferred. On the old Form 4473, you're required to mark out, line out whatever number it was if no firearms were transferred, and write in place 0. You are no longer required to do that. Box 8, private party transfers, really simple there. I think it's pretty much self-explanatory. Box 14, sex, non-binary. It's important to note that I don't care what the individual recognizes themselves as. The fact of the matter is, unless their identification stipulates non-binary, then it does not apply, and they have to put whatever gender, sex they are. So if they're transgender and transgender to a male, and their DL driver's license or identification still says male, they have to put that. If it says female, they have to put that. So what you'll see with in some instances, some states, they've actually started putting non-binary on the license. It has to actually state non-binary.
Well, JC's talked a lot about the 4473 and what we do. And we just want to sum it up with some of these best practices you can implement as an FFL. And the number one thing is just get it right the first time. If we train our folks and retrain and review and take time when we're reviewing our forms at the end of the day, or maybe the second set of eyes throughout the day, go back and have the corrective behavior conversation with each and every person. And don't just correct the form, go have the conversation so that we continue to get it right the first time. And think about how much time would be saved, not only on you, on your managers and supervisors, and us if we come in and review, how much time can be saved if everything looks good. And we're pretty sure that if the inspector, the ATF inspector, comes to your location for an inspection and reads through maybe 300 or 400 4473s and everything's good, we can only assume there's going to be a good outcome. But if they read through 300 or 400 like we do on a visit and find a lot of errors, I think there's not going to be a great outcome. So get it right the first time and reduce your errors for any inspector coming in. And then legibility, we talked about legibility and penmanship. And if you're not using an electronic package to go ahead and print out information for make, model, serial number, or importer distributor, or even your FFL licensing address and FFL number, or the NICS information, it's going to be a problem. We can't see often enough where FFLs are debating in a warning conference that they can read the form and they can figure out the numbers, but the ATF inspector marked it incorrect because he or she could not read the form. Well, remember, these forms get sent to a tracing center. When necessary, they get presented in a court of law to defense attorneys and prosecutors if and when those firearms are involved in criminal cases. That form has to be readable and decipherable to a jury. Otherwise, that form is not going to be a valid presentation of evidence. So legibility. We say go e-form 4473. What we mean by that is just either sign up with the ATF for their electronic package, or find a vendor out there. We have many partners. Find a vendor out there that can fit you to the right package and expense. The more electronic you go with your forms and your record keeping, the better. On Section C, train, train, train. That was formerly Section B. Train your staff. Every box, every line needs to have the relative information if necessary. And if you're a member of the National Shooting Sports Foundation, go ahead and order their what they call the 4473 overlay that helps you and your staff look at these forms when they're completed and before transferring the firearm to make sure the respective boxes that need to be filled in are. It's a great little tool available from the National Shooting Sports Foundation. Educate the transferee. We talk about this in different ways, but you're not allowed to coach. We know that. You're not allowed to help answer questions, but you can have signs or guides. We have a few available if you need these. Go to our website, and actually we'll include these in our download page for today's summit. But you can have signage that says, make sure you have a photo ID, a valid unexpired state photo ID before asking to look for a firearm. You can have that in writing on your gun counter. You can have a sheet of different things, and what we include. You'll read the form carefully before proceeding. The instructions are available. Our employees are not capable or able to answer questions in sections 12. So you can kind of give especially the first-time gun buyer, some information ahead of time so that they can flow through the process more easily for themselves and for you. The double check and triple check can't be reiterated enough. You're just losing out if you're not having a second set of eyes look at the form. And again, where you're high volume, high transfer location, even a third set of eyes before that form gets filed. And then 3310s and 12s, as we say, same day, end of day business. Get those into the ATF. They're very, very important to the ATF tracing and trafficking activities that are ongoing to keep our communities safe. And then lastly, just timely transfers in and out, whether it be the A&D process or especially on your 4473 transfers. Make sure you're getting the right documentation updated in your bound book or in your electronic system.
All right, so some additional errors that we're definitely seeing in the A&D record keeping. Importer. When we do our mock inspection, I know that I always do this. I do what's called, I look for my troublemakers, my Berettas, my Glocks, my Taurus, Walther, any number of those firearms that I know are imported, and it's the first thing I look at. I grab the A&D log. I make sure that the FFL knows how to print it off, because the ATF is going to expect you to print it off. And then I just look down the line and I start finding the guns. And then once I do that, then I actually go out to the floor and I verify and I actually check everything. So it's really important that you're paying attention to what's on that physical firearm and understanding that importer is required. If that's a Glock and it was made in Austria, it needs to say Glock. Okay. So make sure you're recording that importer. Serial numbers, spaces, dashes, physical firearm. I don't care what's on the box. I don't care what's on the paperwork. I want to know what that firearm says. Legibility is key. If you can, go electronic, integrate with your point of sale system. Staff training, we reiterate this constantly, and it goes right back to standard operating procedures and practices. Make sure that you're training your staff how to receive firearms, what to document, how, when they need to document it, etc. Timely transfers in and out. That gun gets transferred. Physical custody of that firearm goes to the transferee, the buyer, the purchaser. Guess what? You're on the hook. Document in your A&D record books that firearm left your building. You don't want to wait. Things get lost in the process. People don't realize, oh, I thought Jim over here did it, and he thought I did it, etc. Make sure that those are documented in your A&D records. And it's all about the trace. Everything that you're doing as far as your A&D records and your 4473 are all about a potential trace coming down the pipe later on. All right, warning and revocations. And there's something, that I definitely want to call out as far as warning and revocations are concerned. If you have an inspection and it goes sideways quick, there's nothing that says that you have to go through any type of step process before revocation. So in other words, if IOI shows up and does an inspection in your store and they find out that you're transferring firearms to people that were otherwise denied, you're transferring firearms without 4473s, and obviously this is kind of the most extreme scenario, you can go right to revocation. The ATF takes this stuff very seriously. So you need to make sure that you are conducting business properly. So let's walk through it here. So you get revoked, you get that letter of revocation, you receive that certified mail, and here's the process. Essentially what's led to this is you had a inspection. It led to a report of violations. From there, you probably either received a warning letter or a warning conference. You've then been re-inspected. And at that time, they've basically taken your past reports of violations and said, you know what, you're not only not correcting what we've already found multiple times potentially, but you're also making mistakes on other things. So they take a look at that and they say, you know what, this individual's not serious. They're not doing what they signed up and said they were going to do, which was follow the laws and regulations governing, a firearms business. So this is the process. So once you get that revocation letter, you'll have a revocation hearing. You'll have two, actually. You can request an informal hearing where you have a conversation and you can plead your case. And then there's a formal revocation hearing. So, and you will have to travel to the field division to have that conversation. Depending on where you are, that could be a long way off. There's a process to this. We help with a lot of these. Our law firms that we support bring us in to help them with these processes. And we build out the corrective action plan. We have the relationships with most of the field divisions to have conversations. But I will tell you, once you get to this step, it's a fight. And, it is what it is. You were given, multiple chances to do what you're supposed to do, and you haven't. So the ATF has taken that pretty seriously.
And finally, we want to wrap up with how you need to stay compliant, as we know the inspections are going to be forthcoming, and we know this administration could be imposing stricter guidelines for FFLs once we figure out who's in charge of the country. So avoid willful negligence. I think we're going to leave this for you, JC. So come back after I finish. Make sure your trace requests are going in on time. We explained earlier how important they are, especially to the ATF criminal division. Make sure they're going in within 24 hours. And if you're in a demand letter program, demand 1 or 2, make sure you're getting that information to the ATF quarterly. We help a lot of our clients with this. We actually use the electronic files and send them in timely so that the tracing centers, first of all, can use that information more quickly to determine traces without bothering you. That's what this is all about. They don't want to call you all the time if they could just figure out the information from your files you're sending in. Straw purchases, prevent straw purchases. Too many straw purchases, you will be a target of an inspection or a criminal investigation by the ATF. Make those pamphlets available that the ATF and FBI have available to you. Youth Handgun Safety Act, make sure the sign is posted. It's very important to community safety. Handgun locks must be distributed to used and new gun purchasers, new transferees. If you don't have them, contact your local law enforcement agency. They usually have some available, or contact us. We'll provide cheap vendors for you. The Don't Lie program has been revamped by the National Shooting Sports Foundation. All of those materials are available for free. So go to nssf.org or don'tlie.org and find out where those program components are available for display in your place of business. NFA segregation is critical. If an ATF inspector comes in and finds you mixing NFA inventory or your books together with your non-NFA, it's going to be a problem. So make sure it's all segregated and secured. And lastly, make sure you're cordial to that ATF inspector if and when they ever do show up.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to your point, JB, go back to that willful intent, willful negligence. I've mentioned the most extreme, knowingly transferring a firearm to somebody that was denied, something of that nature, or transferring a firearm to somebody and not getting a 4473 completed. Those are probably the most extreme. But I will tell you that, if an IOI comes in and does your inspection and they start seeing the same thing, missing signatures, missing certifications, not checking boxes, things like that. Those are also willful. Those could be demonstrated as willful. So you want to watch that.
And we're seeing more and more in the cases and revocation issues we're dealing with that willful negligence is being cited simply as the FFL not adhering to knowledge and requirements as set forth in the FFL guidebook. So because you have the knowledge, you're just not using it, is being cited as willful negligence. So just be aware of that.
Yeah. And I'm just going to reiterate the be cordial. We work with the ATF across the country, every field division. And I will tell you right now, for the most part, where they can, they will bend over backwards to help you and make sure that you know how to conduct business properly. So don't take a adversarial role when they show up. Be cordial. Welcome them in. Let them do their job. All right, now we're going to cover range issues. So one of the big ones right now, we're getting it from FFLs and ranges across the country, is how do I survive without ammo, or how do I even get ammunition? Well, I wish I had a good answer for you. Right now, essentially ammunition, nobody is increasing their supply chain in this, mainly because we said it earlier, there aren't any supplies. Ammo is constrained right now, metals, raw materials, etc. So surviving without ammo is tough. You can do some training and coaching classes without ammo. There are cheaper solutions out there, so take a look at those. Many FFLs and ranges are maintaining their supply and basically holding back one box of ammunition for every firearm that they have for sale. In other instances, what we're seeing is ranges especially are reserving their ammunition supplies for individuals coming in to utilize their range facilities. So that's a couple of strategies that we see out there that are working pretty well. It's kind of a rationing process. So, and that's the other thing FFLs are doing, you know, the 2-box rationing or 1-box rationing, depending on how much ammunition they're getting. So we're going to talk a lot more about pandemic here in a few, but pandemic restrictions, make sure you have a plan. You know that essentially early on in this pandemic, we really were fighting to keep FFLs and gun ranges open with the legislative team and government affairs team with the National Shooting Sports Foundation. But you need to make sure that you have a documented plan. That's what your health departments, that's what your public officials are going to want to see. And it just provides that argument for staying open. So it's a good thing to do. And so touching on noise suppression real quick, if you're operating a range, maybe it's near a residential area, or you have other neighbors, commercial neighbors, business neighbors and such, and you're starting to see complaints about that, any type of noise, or you're staying open later, or whatever the case may be, reach out to us. We have noise abatement solutions. We have a number of organizations that work with us and that we refer to help with noise abatement concerns. So just reach out to us. We can help you with that. We've actually had probably, I don't know, JB, what, a half dozen or maybe more than that now, FFLs that have just had an extraordinary business. Really, there's no ranges nearby. And customers are asking about it. And because they've had an extraordinary business, they've actually considered moving into a range and purchasing a range or constructing a range. Know that we do have an entire range development team to help you. So again, reach out to us. We'll get you in contact with them. There's a little bit of a process to it. Our folks like to vet and make sure that the individuals are ready to go. And we've got a complete checklist that'll help you determine whether or not, you know, a range is right for you. So definitely reach out to us for that as well. You know, some of the range challenges that are out there, and it's not just ranges, but it's FFLs as well. You know, the costs and supply are down. I talked about it earlier. The key here is this. I mean, essentially, if you're the low man on the totem pole, for lack of a better term, that's what you are. Ammunition manufacturers are focused, obviously, on LE and government. They're probably their biggest customer. You know, it's all about public safety. It's all about national defense. So, and then from there, they're going to go down the list and they're going to find the individuals or companies, businesses that are buying the most ammo from them. They're trying their best to segregate those shipments and get a little bit out to everyone, but it's tough. You know, it's tough, and we just have to recognize that. You know, safety training for new shooters. This is a big one, and it's something that we talk to a lot of our ranges, even our FFLs about, really. You know, it's important with 12 million new firearms out there right now. And of that, I don't know, what is it, 5 to 7 million of those firearms are in the hands of actually new shooters, people who have never been involved in the shooting sports before. You know, here's a great opportunity for you to either do coaching or do instructions for concealed carry or whatever the case may be. It's a huge opportunity. We talk to FFLs and ranges all the time about just simply having a cleaning class, teaching people how to clean their firearm appropriately, how to break it down, how to put it back together, and what to use to clean it and things like that. So that's really important. Then we get a lot of questions about NRA versus non-NRA and all the politics and all the other things going on with that. You know, there are other organizations out there that have training curriculum, such as the USCCA, for example, that have very good curriculum that you can use to train your new customers or even your existing customers. So take a look at those opportunities. Attracting those new members, the industry as a whole is very focused on the female shooter, and that should continue. Having women's leagues, now you have families that are stuck at home. So having family-oriented events, that's a big one. Groups, businesses, your corporate entities, those folks, put it out there. You got Let's Go Shooting program. You got the USA Shooting program. You've got the +1 program from the National Shooting Sports Foundation. All great programs that offer extensive advertising and marketing suggestions, recommendations, and solutions that you should be taking advantage of as an FFL and as a range. So future view for range operations, I'll tell you, there's a lot of competition out there and it's only growing. We're getting a lot of calls. Our team, our range development team, is doing a lot of work as far as starting up new ranges, doing construction, just doing simple just feasibility studies on whether or not, market segmentation studies on whether or not a range can be placed where an individual that's interested in owning a range wants to put one. So I will tell you that I think range operations and range facilities, that's going to be growing for a while now. So, and we're going to be doing a ton of future webinars with experts and our range team. So stay tuned for those for sure.
Yeah. So JC, finally with this pandemic, and for all gun dealers and range operators, we talked about civil unrest. Get the checklist. Be prepared. And should be a time-sensitive issue for you if you haven't already looked at that. I'm sure many of you have. The next issue is international manufacturing and shipping. John, jump in here if you want. But the big issues everyone's asking: why a shortage? Well, there's raw materials shortage. There's mining shutdowns internationally. A lot of our raw materials and source components come from China or Brazil, or other. South America is a big mining area for copper and lead. We don't mine any lead in the United States anymore. A lot of folks didn't know that. Primers are unavailable because of components that are required from factories in Germany. So all of this is having a major impact on how the production is slowing down here domestically in the United States. We may have a domestic dealer, but we may have international components that aren't available to come in, parts and pieces that aren't available to build guns or manufacture ammo. No one's opening new factories. We're not hearing of anybody running out. In fact, several are closing down. So the whole Remington debacle recently. Vista Outdoors has a $1 billion backlog on ammunition orders. $1 billion. The future's unpredictable. We don't know what's happening with supply chain. And JC, you talked about priorities and law enforcement and government, probably getting ammunition first, right? Just more on the pandemic, just current, right to the minute stuff here, guys. There's a spike in cases, in case you haven't heard. That spike is going to continue to increase with the schools, the shutdowns coming late and being argued by one side or the other, whether or not a state wants to shut down. I think we're going to continue to see the spike as forecasted. We have no idea if a vaccine is actually on the horizon. You can listen to who you want to, but our intelligence tells us even if a vaccine becomes available, it will be many, many, many months before it actually reaches me and you, and it could be 6 months. So we're looking at the short term, believe it or not, is 6 months. What's in the short term versus the long term, which is multi-years to come. This is going to be critical for 6 months, and we will probably have more of these types of summits to update you as you go along. Make sure you have your PPE supplies. We see the shelves already running bare on things like toilet paper. I mean, that's just what happens when the panic button gets pushed. But are you going to be able to stay open with signage, masks, gloves, and sanitizer? We have all of that. We have signage available. Go to our website. We have our own COVID signage that you can purchase if you need it. But then you got masks and gloves and sanitizer. Do you have your suppliers available and ready to provide to you? Buy now, don't buy later. And the big question we'll talk with the ATF on, are FFLs going to continue to be essential? Will the states or the Biden administration, if put in place, have any impact or say on FFLs being essential. I know the NSSF is looking at this daily and trying to figure out what approach to take if that changes from where it was before, but that's critical to all of us. Unemployment will continue, if not increase, based on shutdowns. Will there be a stimulus available? We don't know. It's been talked about for months, and there was only one stimulus that went out, voted on, and that was back in May. Will there be another one? And then obviously civil unrest and looting as a result of all of this.
So consulting support, we kind of touched on a lot of this throughout the presentation, but FFL and range compliance, obviously your ATF, your state, your local OSHA regulations, we support all of those different functions. We've actually been seeing quite a bit of local ordinances and in states that we would never have expected it as far as gun ranges and gun stores are concerned. So be aware of that, especially if you're a new FFL watching today, or you're somebody that's thinking about transitioning from a home-based FFL to a storefront. Be aware of those things. We've developed SOP manuals across the board, whether it be standard just FFL operations, FFL transactions, the 4473, or it be range operations, or just overall business operations. Our human resources team has an entire gambit of standard operating procedures as far as your employee handbook and things like that. So definitely reach out to us if you're interested. We can certainly help you with all of that. Compliance auditing and training. We're doing a lot of on-site work right now. Even though the pandemic is ongoing, we are traveling out to FFLs, working with them to make sure their compliance is up to par, and even to test employees. We have a number of FFLs that actually have us come in unannounced just to test their employees to make sure operations are running the way they're supposed to. So reach out to us for any questions relative to your insurance or risk management. We can help you with all those things. We work closely with all the insurance providers out there, especially the underwriters, to make sure that you all know exactly where you need to be covered and how to protect yourself in the long term. So retail and range operations, we help all of our clients just to improve their business practices and do new things, rise to the occasion, rise to the challenges that are being faced in the industry. We've got a lot of insights that we can help you out with. That physical security and site design, I touched on new FFLs or individuals transitioning, or maybe you want to go, like I said earlier, from just being a gun store to being a gun store and a gun range. So, we can help with those things. Theft investigations, pretty self-explanatory. Believe it or not, employees and customers do steal firearms, do steal products. So we can help you with that as well, and understanding solutions that are out there to prevent those incidents from happening.
And hey, folks, so we packed a lot into this last hour. We have a lot more in future webinars coming up. Make sure you are a member with us. Go in and log on to our site at FFL Consultants. And remember, everyone, if there's one thing to do today, write down his phone number, because we're here to answer your call. We are a supporting member, as is MT2, for the National Shooting Sports Foundation. We talk to members all day long on their behalf. And even if you're not a member, call us. Your first call is always free on any of these issues we talked about today, and then some. But if it's not critical, please go out to our calendar site, schedule 30 minutes with us. Let's get a bunch of questions answered for you, and make sure you're doing things right, and farewell through the pandemic and the future. And remember,
hey, why don't we do this? Why don't we, for those attending the call today, the sessions, why don't we just do the remainder of November? They can call us as many times as they want.
Okay. All right. So listen. All right, JC. Sometimes you're the boss. I'll go with it. All right. So for November, again, if you got a critical compliance, customer standing in front of me question, I need an answer so I don't do it wrong, give us a call. If we're not on an airplane or talking with other clients, we'll pick up your call. We'll give you a quick answer. But if it's something you need that's not critical, please go out to our calendar system off our webpage, our homepage, and just schedule 30 minutes with us. We'll get a whole lot more questions answered for you.
All right. So for our next session, we've got our keynote speakers, Assistant Directors Tom Chittum and Alfonso Hughes with the ATF. Let me tell you something. These are the number twos at the ATF, and they are very important to our world as FFLs and gun ranges. So stay tuned for that next session coming up. We'll see you in a couple minutes.